Well, while we're waiting to get my presentation up, I just want to relay a nice story then. This will be one to think about in relation to humility and intellectual humility in particular. I always like to recount this one because this is one of those stories I think really set me apart and made me think about how I needed to approach things. So I started working on my master's degree at ECU in history, medieval history, because I thought that was cool. Okay, so I like The Hobbit a lot, so there you go. So I went for medieval history. So there were two medieval historians. There was one in the maritime department who was kind of an average historian, did a lot of surfing, I knew that, and so I could have went with him, or I could have went with Dr. Enright, Dr. Michael Enright, who just retired this year from ECU. And so I went with Dr. Enright, even though everybody warned me, no, don't go with him. He is a jerk. Well, I said, well, no. I looked, and of course he had several publications, and I was impressed with that. And so I finally convinced him, after a lot of work, that take me on, and I was going to work on my thesis with him. So I spent, of course, I was teaching, and so I had to go part-time, and so I spent a year to produce the first chapter of my thesis. And I worked so hard because I met with him every month or so, and he would tell me what to read, and I would dutifully write it down, and I would start read, and I wrote this chapter, and I looked at the chapter. I spent a year on it, and I looked, and it was incredible. Incredible. I'm a genius. This is awesome. So I turned it into Dr. Enright, and about a month passed by, and no Dr. Enright. So I called him. He kept office hours, but only infrequently and not very often. And so finally got a chance to meet with him. So we sat in his office, just me and him, and I still remember his office very clearly, books all scattered about. And so I said, well, did you read the first chapter of my thesis? And he said, yes, I read it. Here you go. And he handed the paper back to me. I looked at it, and he had red pen. He didn't mind using red pen. He didn't think that hurt your feelings or anything. And he used red pen quite a bit. And it was like, wow, that's a lot. I spent a year on that, and that's a lot. But he kept lots of red marks, continual red marks. Whoa. And then finally at page 8, it stopped. I said, oh, so the introduction wasn't so good, but things got better. He said, no, it was so bad, I couldn't waste my time and read it. You need to learn how to write, or you need to leave this program. So, what do you do with that? First, yes, sir, thank you very much. Thank you for that intellectual beating, thank you. And so I walked out the door, and I do remember this very clearly. Walked out the door, I said, you know what? I could go with the surfer guy, and I feel sure that will be the better route, and the easier route too, because that will be the way to go. Or I could do what he says, learn how to write, rewrite this first chapter, which I spent a year on, and try again. Or also maybe fail again too. And so what I decided to do, and I do remember standing there at the elevator, and I said, you know what? I'll go with Dr. Enright. And it was a difficult time. Very, very difficult. But it made all the difference, because I did learn how to write. I was able to produce 2 books because of that, because people recognized I knew how to write history. So that goes to show, sometimes the hard road is difficult, and sometimes it hurts, and that hurt. But sometimes it's very well worth it. And to this day, Me and Dr. Enright are friends. He's still Dr. Enright to me. I don't call him Michael, but he's still Dr. Enright, and he still tells me what I'm doing wrong with my career and my papers and stuff like that. I still give his advice to this day. But it's very important to have a mentor like that, and also to recognize, to have that intellectual humility to take that. So I appreciate you listening to me about Dr. Enright. I always like to tell that story. I always like to tell that story in relation to intellectual humility, to take feedback, even though some of the feedback is sometimes harsh. And that was an awfully harsh feedback, but definitely worth it in the end, worth it to listen to that. Because, of course, in general, what we do when we hear that feedback is we automatically become defensive and don't want to listen. So listening to that intellectual feedback with some humility is always good. So with that being said, let's talk about educational principles. And I'm going to read you a little bit of a paper, talk about some things, and I'll listen to your feedback later on as we get through with this. So, in the past few decades, there have been numerous popular texts and documentaries. Recently, Diane Ravage's The Death and Life of the Great School System, and Davis Guggenheim's documentary, Waiting for Superman. Y'all remember that, I feel sure, that describe in some detail the current state of public education. In these works, and others like them, words like crisis, decline, devaluation are repeatedly used. The U.S. government has also voiced criticism of public education through various reports, including, if y'all remember, some of you, the influential A Nation at Risk, published in 1983 under the Reagan administration. This historic report describes a bleak picture of education in need of higher graduation requirements, higher standards for academic performance, more instructional time, and quality teachers. In response to these dim pictures of public education, educators and reformers have offered a variety of remedies for the problems of public education. The federal government implemented the measures including, we all know these, No Child Left Behind in 2002, Race to the Top in 2009, and state governments have worked on localized curriculum development. Additionally, private foundations like the Annenberg Foundation, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Walton Foundation, and the Broad Foundation have provided public education funding for an accompanying agenda of educational reform. Again, these various education reform movements, against these various education reform movements, I would like to sketch an analogy to chess. And the reason why is because I do play chess quite a bit, and I actually play, and ranked and rating and won a few tournaments here and there. So I love chess, don't get me wrong. But I always like to take chess and compare that to life, and especially education. So the analogy works very well here. Chess. I'm not going to explain how to play it. If you want to know, you can come to me later on. Chess is played on a board of 64 squares with 32 chess pieces, of which there are just 6 different kinds. Yet, as with education, the simplicity of the game fools the casual observer. There are infinite amount of potential results at the end of the game, or in chess terms, the end game. For example, with each chess turn in position, there are about 40 possible moves. Seeing one full move ahead, meaning seeing your and your opponent's next move, will involve knowing 1,600 different positions. Seeing 2 full moves ahead will involve seeing 2.5 million positions. Seeing 3 moves ahead will involve 4 billion moves. And despite over 1,000 years of chess history, there's no agreement on the best single way to start the game. The Queen's Gambit, E4, the oldest opening in chess, is still disputed in thousands of articles and books. There are no cheat codes with chess. There's no silver bullet to victory on the chessboard. The situation is very comparable to that of educational reformers as they prepare students for the hyper-connected, globalized world of the 21st century. a world that is transnational, transpolitical, transacademic, and transtemporal. Much like we cannot accurately forecast the course of a game of chess, which in narrow comparison to the realities of life, we cannot predict for something as complex as educating for life. Yet, chess grandmasters, which I am not one, understand a set of principles that have been developed over 100 years of experience. These principles guide their strategies, tactics, and individual moves in a continually dynamic game. It is a deep understanding of these principles that is foundational to success on the chessboard. Thus, continuing this comparison, one must begin any educational enterprise with a framework of principles so that sound decisions can be made concerning emergent paths of education. Let me give you an example. This is fun because you can go to chess.com. I do every night. Go to chess.com. It calms me down at the end of the day to play a couple games of chess. You can always tell when somebody's playing from a chess book or playing with a chess computer because they'll set in a few specific lines of notation. The first 5 moves, they memorize the first 5 moves. The problem with that is after that first 5 moves, things fall apart because they don't have the principles to understand what they need to do beyond the 5 moves. Same with education. People understand the first few moves that you have, but they don't understand the principles that go behind all the moves that make daily decisions happen. And that's important. To start with the development of educational principles, we must first delineate the goals of education. That's important to have the goals of education. The goal of chess is simply to take the opposing king. But what are the goals of education? Although educational goals seem well defined, this is really not the case. Differences surrounding the goals of education have a long and deep historiography, interspersed with the ideas of philosophers foundational to Western civilization, including Plato, Aristotle, Descartes, Rousseau, Kant, Kierkegaard, and Dewey. The central concern in this debate is the binary positions of moral or content-based education, more commonly called character or knowledge. In fact, what happens is people will say either let's do character education, or then a lot of other people say, well, let's do content education. And they go into the binary positions of those two. At this point, there's little I can add to this ongoing polemic of educational philosophy. I will say this. The Thales Way assumes a positive perspective of human nature that allows for the education of individual autonomy and human flourishing. This approach equally involves both moral and content-based teaching that emphasizes both character and knowledge educating for the whole student. To modernize language, the goal of education presented here focuses on the development of cognitive and non-cognitive skills in students. If these skills are developed in a complementary manner, they'll prepare a student for educational and vocational success. Thus, the skill set needed to be defined before the development of educational principles is the whole student. And that's what we'll work on. So let's talk about cognitive skills first. Because in public education in particular, there's been a heavy emphasis on cognitive skills. Anybody know the reason why? It's easy to measure cognitive skills. It's very easy to measure cognitive skills. And that's why we focused on that. That came from a lot of the No Child Left Behind, is that we developed standardized testing, we looked at cognitive skills, and that's what we started measuring at a very high rate. And so we became ultra-focused on cognitive skills. Cognitive skills refer to categories of learning that have to do with thinking. In unpacking this term, it's preferable to use the terminology found in Revised Bloom's taxonomy. Y'all remember Revised Bloom's taxonomy, I hope, since it dominates the field for both its curricular and educational accessibility. RBT, Revised Bloom's taxonomy, follows an ascending order of complexity: knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, evaluation, and at the top, remember, creation. These should be briefly defined. Remember, knowledge is defined, and that's at the lowest set, recalling or remembering content without necessarily understanding it. Comprehension is described as knowledge understood but not related to other content. Application is using content to solve the situational problems. Analysis is breaking content into parts and developing connections between parts and organizing principles. Evaluation is defined as judging the values of materials or methods applied. And then finally, again, the highest order is creation or synthesis on this slide, because you're taking all the ideas around and you're creating something. And remember, that's the highest level that we want our students to have. But remember, with the system that we have, direct instruction is teaching them knowledge and comprehension, which are key, foundational portions to get to the synthesis and the creation. You cannot create if you don't have foundations to build with. And since the 1970s, the rise of high-stakes standardized testing, public education has focused the majority of its energy on these cognitive skills in relation to content. So, let's talk about non-cognitive skills. With the focus on cognitive skills in the recent decades, may have lamented the lack of character education in schools. This historical development has been traced by James Davidson Hunter in The Death of Character to a variety of factors, including the influence of psychological trends in education and the development of humanistic psychology in education, where we have come to the point where in education where we don't want to learn about the moral lives of children, nor do we want to determine that. And let me add about James Davidson Hunter. He came to Franklin Academy's graduation to speak and had a wonderful speech that I'll distribute to all of you. Very good speech. The Death of Character is a very good text. It deals with the problem with character education being pulled out of schools. Other societal factors that Hunter cites are the growth of a moral relativistic perspective and the need for inclusiveness within the growing diversity of faith traditions in schools. The Nobel economist James Heckman has also attributed the rise of cognitive achievement tests to comparable factors, including technical developments, the rise of cognitive psychology, the phase out of character education, and the accountability movement, starting with A Nation at Risk. These factors have released public education from a societal function of moral education and development. Remember, education started out as a function of society to build good students for society, to build good people for society, not to focus on cognitive skills, but to focus on the whole student. The unintended consequence of these developments of the later 20th and early 21st century is that many traits that educators and employers believe that students need to be successful, both educationally and vocationally, are disregarded. These non-cognitive skills generally refer to a set of abilities sometimes termed as soft skills or personal skills that include a wide range of personality traits, attitudes, values, and beliefs. Or what Howard Gardner, you remember Howard Gardner, I hope, multiple intelligences, acclaimed developer of multiple intelligences, educationalist, terms the 21st century mind. Gardner categorizes this as disciplined, synthesizing, creating respectful and ethical minds. Wide-ranging inquiries into non-cognitive skills are only recent occurrence in the field of educational research. Contemporary studies have demonstrated that non-cognitive traits might be as important or more important than cognitive skills in determining educational outcomes. From these studies, non-cognitives are a factor in student success in school while contributing to later student economic advantages that include earning power and occupational success. In a nutshell, student does very well on SATs, but doesn't have high non-cognitive skills. They will not succeed educationally or vocationally as well as a student who scores possibly lower on the SAT but has higher non-cognitive skills. Let me go back to Dr. Enright. Bad day for me. non-cognitive skill that I took from that: resilience, intellectual humility. Other people will have walked away. That's the non-cognitives we need to teach our students: to take criticism, to take feedback, to pull it together and work with it. Now, there's this one text in particular that really kind of develops these non-cognitive skills in the classroom. It's called Non-Cognitive Skills in the Classroom: New Perspectives on Educational Research. And here's what they did. It's actually by a group called the Research Triangle Institute and the Spencer Foundation. They're here in Raleigh. And what they did is they analyzed over 200 studies from Eric and EBSCOhost from the periods of 1997 to 2008. And they looked at all the non-cognitive terminology that was in these 200 studies. So they took a look at all the different professors in psychology, education, writing about non-cognitives. And they took all that terminology and they started to identify 7 non-cognitive skills that were most important in student development. And here's the 7 that they developed, or what they feel like most people focus in on. And you probably recognize them: motivation, effort, self-regulated learning, academic self-efficacy, academic self-concept, positive social behavior, and resilience. Those are the 7 non-cognitives that, after looking at all this literature, that they noticed people were working with and that had the most impact on education. So let's define just a few of them quickly. Motivation, of course, I think we know, is a desire to learn and accomplish things in academic activities. Effort includes the degree to which students are willing to take an active role in that learning. Okay? And so how much effort are they willing to do? Self-regulated learning, you all know this, encompasses the student's ability to evaluate a task, problem solve, and revise their strategies to move forward. That is a life skill we all need. To take a look at what's been done, say, this is what's been done right, this is what's been done wrong, let's take that all in, develop another strategy, and move forward. Academic self-efficacy is a student's belief that he or she can complete a subject-specific task. Academic self-concept is defined as a perceived competence in school, self-perceived competence in school. And we all know this one. Positive social behavior encompasses a spectrum of behaviors, including, you have aggressive students to dismissive students. Again, let's go back to the SAT student who scores real high. His social behavior is very dismissive of his teachers and his students around him. So how much feedback is he going to get from other people? And how is that going to move the ball forward in his education and his vocations? Those are things to consider. And the last one, going back to Dr. Enright, is resilience. Referring to educational achievement despite risk factors, which include academic, demographic, or psychological factors. And the psychological factor for me and Dr. Enright, of course, was if I turned in another draft to him, would he return it back to me again and say, man, this is bad, again? That was a risk that I was willing to take. So those non-cognitive skills are important as we move forward. So let's talk about frameworks. With these cognitive and non-cognitive skills in developing principles, what I wanted to do is develop a framework to have that hinge on. So there are 2 texts in particular that I worked with. This was Christopher Peterson's Character, Strengths, and Virtues. He's a positive psychologist. And there's another book by the National Research Council of the National Academies called Education for Life and Work. So let's take the first book, because the first book, Christopher Peterson and his colleague decided to reclaim the study of character and virtue as a legitimate topic of psychological inquiry and informed societal discourse. In short, what they wanted to do is take virtue and character strengths and traits and put it back into societal discourse. Let's talk about virtue and what virtue means, and let's be honest about it. Let's not soft soap it. So, in doing that, they decided to look at quite a few sources. So they went to China and they looked at Confucian and Taoist virtues. They went to South Asia and looked at Buddhist and Hindu virtues. They looked at the Greco-Roman virtues, Judeo-Christian virtues, and the Islamic virtues. So they took all those virtues together. Then they looked at different virtues and strengths inventories from Charlemagne, Benjamin Franklin, William Bennett, if you've read some of his texts, and Sir John Templeton. Then they went to some other sources. My son gets a kick out of this, and because he's a law school person, he reads all the drafts of my talks, so just let you know. So they pull from virtues from some other sources, including the Boy Scouts of America, the Girl Guides of Canada, the Klingon Empire. I like that one especially a lot. I'm a big Trekkie. Live long and prosper. Character education and programs, Hallmark greeting cards, bumper stickers, Saturday evening post covers by Norman Rockwell, personal ads, popular song lyrics. This is the one my son liked. The profile of Pokemon characters, and the residence hall of Hogwarts. So what they did is they took all these inventories of virtues and character traits from all these different sources and started to pick out what societies like. And they also got rid of redundancies and so forth. So finally, the authors divided situational themes, which are the subject to specific habits that led people to manifest given characters, strengths in given situations. They really wanted to focus in providing the research instruments to undertake investigations that would lessen school failure, drug use, violence, and the like. So they took all these character strengths, this classification of character strengths and virtues by the authors is an informative and thought-provoking way in which Thales can, look at non-cognitive skills and educational principles. The second major source of educational principles that I'm going to draw on, and we are leading to a point here at the end, is Education for Life and Work by the NRC, which is the focus on the development of transferable knowledge and skills for the 21st century. The underlying thesis of this text is that today's children can meet future challenges if their schooling and informal learning activities provide them for adult roles as citizens, employees, managers, parents, volunteers, and entrepreneurs. This is evident by the fact that business and political leaders are increasingly asking schools to develop skills such as problem solving, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and self-management, often referred to as 21st century skills. These 21st century skills are positively affected by deep learning, defined as a process in which a student is capable of applying learning across disciplines and in new situations, in education that correlates positively with educational and vocational outcomes. What you want students to do, in fact, and what they're looking for, is they want students who will take the information from your class and be able to apply it to other classes and then go beyond the four walls of the classroom and the four walls of the school and apply it to their life on a daily basis. They don't want to read Moby Dick, for example, and just read it in your classroom and let it be stuck in your classroom. What they want is it to be read and used elsewhere in their life. Drawing on large research bases, including cognitive, developmental, educational, organizational, and social psychology, and economics, for purposes of clarifying and organizing concepts and terms, the findings of the NRC reveal that beyond items within the cognitive domain, which we've talked about, there are two competencies that mean the most: intrapersonal and interpersonal competencies. Staying conscientious and hardworking are most highly correlated with the desirable educational, career, and health outcomes. So let's talk about interpersonal. Interpersonal is something that the NRC wants, saying that we need to develop in students intellectual openness, work ethic, and positive self-evaluation. Continually, we need to have students be intellectually open to criticisms, to be able to work hard through those criticisms, and then have a positive self-evaluation associated with those criticisms. Interpersonal domain means this, and we all know this from our experiences in the classroom. We need students who exhibit strong teamwork, collaboration, and leadership. We all have been aware of students who don't work well with groups. We need to teach them to work well with groups, because collaboration is the key to success in the 21st century. Teamwork is the key to success. Working successfully with teams is it. Additionally, the NRC states that the development of a full range of 21st century competencies within the discipline require, and listen closely, systematic instruction and sustained practice. And it will be necessary to devote additional instruction time and resources to advance these sophisticated disciplinary learning goals over what is common in current practice. In effect, the NRC is saying we cannot just simply teach about U.S. history in the classroom. We need to teach U.S. history in relation to interpersonal and interpersonal skills. We need to work on the whole student. It's important for us to do that. So, let's talk about the educational principles. Based on all this research, I put together 10 educational principles which will underline the Thales Way. Now, these won't come up on daily conversation and terminology, but understand that as we progress forward, these are the guiding principles that will guide our decisions. So let's talk about the framework. So, using the cognitive and interpersonal and interpersonal competencies, we have the following. The first is critical thinking. We all agree that this is an educational principle we should have. It incorporates problem solving, analysis, reasoning, interpretation, decision making, and being able to adapt, adaptive learning. The second educational principle that will underline all of our actions is knowledge, which includes information literacy, information and technology literacy, meaning we need to have them be able to take an iPad, go online, be able to look at different sources, weigh those sources, and know which ones are credible. Oral and written communication, active listening, that's a tight one, and general content skills. Another cognitive competency that we want to focus in on is creativity. Of course, that's high on the revised Bloom's taxonomy. Creativity integrates innovation, complex problem-solving skills, and idea generation. We want students who are able to create, to take all the information that we provide them and create something with it. That's important. At the end of the day, that's what we want. And that's what the senior paper will be about, is they'll be able to take all the information they put together, K-12, and produce a senior paper, a thesis on their own that will show that they are responding to the education that we provided. Now, within the interpersonal competencies, which include managing one's behavior, emotions to achieve one's goals, there are 3 different principles I want to focus in on. The first, going back to Dr. Enright, intellectual honesty, which encapsulates flexibility, adaptability, artistic and cultural appreciation, personal and social responsibility, appreciation for diversity, continuous learning, openness, intellectual interest, and curiosity. We want continuous learners who are open to new learning, new ideas, new things, who are also open to criticism. Work ethic. This is an important one too. This includes initiative, self-direction, responsibility, perseverance, productivity, forethought, performance, professionalism, ethics, integrity, citizenship, career orientation, conscientiousness about what they are doing. The final interpersonal is self-regulation. We all know this one to be a good one. Self-monitoring, self-evaluation, self-reinforcement, positive physical and psychological health, emotional stability. All these are principles. So let's talk about educational principles that are interpersonal. Collaboration, which incorporates positive communication, teamwork, cooperation, coordination, perspective taking, trust, service, conflict resolution, negotiation, agreeableness. The other educational principle is leadership. This includes assertive communication, self-presentation, positive social skills, social influence, extroversion. Then we're going to add two more. These I add from the character strengths from the earlier text. The other principle is humanity, defined as interpersonal strengths that involve tending and befriending others. This includes valuing close relationships, kindness, generosity, care, compassion, altruistic love, social intelligence. We want people who are compassionate for other people. We want to teach that. The last one is transcendence. This is added from earlier text also. This is defined as strengths that forge connections to a larger universe and provide meaning, that incorporates an appreciation of beauty and excellence, gratitude, hope and optimism, humor, spirituality, faith, and purpose. We need to respect transcendence in our students. To simplify this framework, we nearly discard the categories, which we could do, since it's understood that education in this context involves both cognitive and non-cognitive skills. Thus, we are left with the 10 educational principles that are foundational to the whole student. These are represented on this table. So, taken several sources and produced 10 educational principles that match up to the Thales Way. So what am I going to do with these educational principles as we're coming to the end? These educational principles detailed in this essay can serve as a foundation or ground by which to measure our school progress, missions, programs, and curricular development. In fact, every decision that we make as Thales will be grounded in these educational principles. For example, the Thales Outcomes posters, which we promise soon, those are grounded in these educational principles. These educational principles will not be on the forefront, but they'll be in the underlying philosophy of what we do and the decisions that we make, the policies that we implement, will all be grounded in these educational principles and nothing else. And if they do not match up with these educational principles, then they are not going to happen in Thales. Period. So returning to the chess comparison, from the beginning of the essay, chess GMs, grandmasters, if you don't remember, have a basic understanding of chess principles that they bring to the table. With each move of a very dynamic and emergent match, the chess GM reflects on these chess principles, always thinking about the principles as they're playing the game. The player who does not continually return to these principles will lose the game, for sure, which I've lost a lot of games. And I have to also remind you about chess on this one. Even the best international grandmasters lose 40% of their games. People don't realize that. That means they continually come back to the board, even after they lose. And so much like chess, the emerging task of educational decision-making by the board of directors, administration, and faculty should be grounded in the educational principles detailed in this essay to ensure student and school success. Eventually, after consistent reference to these principles, they will serve, using another chess analogy, as a strong square strategy. Like the GM, Aaron Nebowitz, first detailed the strong square strategy in his text, My System, in 1925. He advanced the now common strategic understanding that a winning position can be developed by absolute control over a single square on the chessboard. The critical perspective in this concept is that one should develop an unwavering control of a decided upon strong space. This control should be absolute, that there are no attempt to take the square back. In chess, as well as education, the owner of the strong square can keep going back to the well, so to speak, to bring force to bear in each game. So what we will continue to do is go back to the educational principles, and they will serve as our strong square as we move forward into the future. And things are ever going to be changing with Thales. We are growing, we have a lot of momentum, but we have to keep our educational principles in mind as our strong square continually as we make decisions, curricular decisions, administrative decisions, teacher decisions, continually going back to those educational principles. It is a strong square approach grounded in well-researched and robust educational principles that will deepen our school's impact on educating the next generation. That is the end, I think. Yes, we'll say that's the end for sure. Thank you very much.